You're wondering, what are those four essentials? All right, so pretty much what you need to know, okay, is you need to be focused in on the fact that you need to be basically working on essence stones. Okay, now I would recommend getting them up to level 5 for 3 heroes. When you've gotten them to level 5, then it's going to take some serious investment from that point forward. Okay, I'm saying free to play, you're going to be able to probably do this within reason, but it's one of those things that it's only attainable if you're pay to win, right? And all I'm saying is that having level 10 at level 100 is 100%. So naturally, if you have it at level 5, you're going to have, roughly around that amount, at half the amount, but the point being here is that you want to invest quite a bit into essence stones because this is going to give you infantry health in the case of the belt and the gauntlets, and infantry lethality in the case of the goggles and the boots. Obviously, the inverse of this is also true in different sets. Now, the main reason why I say this, instead of investing into the widgets or the hero, is because the generation starting out is obviously going to be useful and tactful in the beginning, but what will pay its dividends in the long run will be your hero gear, because you can pick this gear up and move it to the next generation of heroes. Which gets into my second essential, which is chief gear, okay? Obviously, you don't get access to this at Furnace until like Furnace 22, but then you don't get to the charms until Furnace 25. Now, I would say almost everybody probably needs to round their sets together in order, So in other words, if you're gonna go up to T1 and then you got to go all T1 across, because when you do that, you're gonna get a bonus, and that bonus is gonna stack up as you go up and up and up. So obviously, you really don't want to ignore this. This is something that you want to focus in on. Now, in terms of investment, I mean, a person can get design plans, polishing solution, and hardened alloys fairly easily, even through all those different events that are available. But I would say oftentimes your biggest expense is going to be in the plans. And then you'll just really dump most of your time into getting polishing solutions. And then hardened alloys are going to be your thing. Now, eventually you do end up getting ambers. And when you get to ambers, which is a little bit past mythic, that's when you'll be using 10 design plans per amber. And it takes roughly about 100 or so amber at that point and onward. Or not 100 amber, but 100 design plans. Anyway, the main thing being is that in the long term, that's something you need to kind of plan out and know going into this. Now, outside of that, something that I think I see a lot of people end up kind of, I don't know, they spend a lot of time on is actually going into their battle tree, and you're going to get a majority of your stats in here. Okay, so a lot of people will dump a lot of their time into going into the battle tree for obvious reasons. Now, the problem being is now, do you go about maxing it out, or do you try to level it approach? Or do you even go into the growth tab and do what I did, which was basically max out your research speed? I'm of the opinion, right, that I think it makes more sense to do your research speed first, go to your growth tree, do your research, get that done, then go to your battle tree and start leveling your battle tree, because it's going to be significantly cheaper because of the research speed improvement. Plus, you can even improve heroes like Jasser, for example, who, in my opinion, I think starting out, almost everybody should be dumping their epic shards into this guy, because you really should get that 50%, 15% research speed. Like, that is a huge bonus. It's a boon to your advantage that mostly everyone else will not have. Now, again, going back to, is that a pay-to-play, free-to-play point? It's more a pay-to-play point. If you have the epic shards that you can do it with, then do it. Now, if you don't, I think, if anything, you need to focus on, in maybe more so on some heroes like Bati or Jesse, or, maybe even Patrick or even Sergey. Those might be better choices for you. But I just know going into this, it's imperative that you get Jasser when you're wanting to go this far into the game. Now, the last essential is obviously knowing your heroes and their generations. So whenever you're wanting to go about attacking or defending, you're going to be picking different heroes and the role in which they play in. Now, there are a couple of things you need to know, which is to say that basically you have the quality or the tier of the hero, right? And then you've also got both that and the skills that they have. Expedition skills, obviously. The first skill is what is relevant when you are joining rallies, as this is what's going to get brought over. If anything, exploration skills are really used in arena more or less, but it's still relevant, whenever you're going around and attacking. And then, of course, there's the actual widget itself. Now, as I was saying earlier, the widget's not as much of a focus when you're working on your hero gear. But when you are really getting to the point where now you want to start nitpicking things, this is where widgets become important. Because you're going to get a stupid amount of bonuses. Like in this case, you're getting 30% reduction in damage received. You're going to get a 15% rally troop attack bonus. And then, conveniently, because Geronimo has that effect, you also get this natural leader bonus on top of it once you get it maxed. I mean, it's a lot of bonuses that you don't want to ignore. Now, this is just Geronimo, right? Of course, there are other things that you need to take into consideration, like, for example, what their class is and what their role is, really, more or less. Which is to say that, are they for infantry, or are they for marksmen, or are they for lancers? And so typically the generation of heroes is also something relevant. So what I mean by that is, like, okay, Zinman, Molly, Natalia, those are all Gen 1s. Gen 2s are going to be things like Philly. You've got Flint. You've got Alonzo for Gen 2. And then obviously after that, there's Gen 3 for Mia, Logan, Greg, and Gen 4, you go into, even more further down the line. But the main thing you need to get from this, right, is the reason why I say a Gen 2 is better than a Gen 1 is if you go down here, tap on this, you'll notice that the stat is at 240. If I look at Zinman, you'll notice it is at 200. There is a 40% increase every generation from the previous generation. The other thing you should know is that if you look at the actual bonus, you'll notice that at a fully maxed out widget, it's 50%. But if you take that same generation and same widget, it is now 10% higher than the previous generation's widget, meaning that you can increase, when it's maxed out, a 10% gain and a 40% gain overall to the unit stat that you're increasing for that generation. Again, these are little things that do add up, and this is why it does matter picking which heroes you're going to pick into a battle. Now, not all heroes are obviously made the same. Some heroes are better for certain circumstances. And I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what heroes I use and in what situations. Okay, so like, for example, let's say I'm going to go rally somebody. And I'm going to go pick a rally target. Obviously, I don't have any marches. Well, that's fine. We can just use an example because I just recently took some hits. And the beauty of being me is, well, I get to give you kind of an eyeball look at what people do versus what I shouldn't have done, right? So looking at this, when you look at the report, right, the main thing that you're going to get out of this report is you're going to get your stat bonuses, and that's also going to tell you your additional bonuses. I had quite a few at the time, so this guy was well outplayed, as you can tell. There's a significant damage difference, right? But one thing that you should probably pay very close attention to is the fact that out of all of these stats, there's actually a way to read this to determine how well you're actually going to be doing. And it's kind of in a diagonal, okay? So when you're looking at this, take the 695 infantry attack and now compare that to what you've got in Lancer defense. And then take the infantry defense and compare that to what you've got in the marksman attack. And then when you're looking at infantry lethality, look at that number and compare that to the health stat of the Lancers. And now, why am I saying this and why do I know this? Well, I can tell you that if you're looking at the infantry attack stat, that's going to determine how much defense is going to get cut. So I know just by taking 302 minus 695 that that's approximately how much they've got to put up with per unit type. Obviously, the tier of the unit is also going to play a factor, and whether or not they're Fire Crystal 1, 2, or 3. In my case, I'm in Fire Crystal 3 already in a state that is mostly Fire Crystal 1 or lower. Not everybody has Fire Crystal 3 as of, day of. Okay, but the mentality here and the reasoning behind why I'm saying this is that if you think in terms of what counters what, which is to say that infantry beats Lancers, Lancers beat Marksmen, Marksmen beat infantry, you can very quickly analyze when you look at the attack stat, cutting their defense, their lethality stat, cutting their health, and their, and then by looking at that, you can very quickly, look at the, that stat, and you can pretty much assess whether or not you're going to win a battle. simply based on those comparisons. Because let's say, for example, I'm, deficient in infantry attack, for example. And so what is going to happen is basically that Lancer defense is going to be higher, and therefore I'm going to do less damage. The lethality stat only does you any good if you've got an attack stat that actually applies. And so in some ways you have to kind of think with that in mind, because even though you have a lethality stat, it doesn't do you much good if you can't get through their defense through the defense stat. That defense stat to attack stat is pretty relevant, just as much as the lethality stat is, so much so that you want to pay very close attention to this. Now, I will point out that, like when you're assessing whether or not why did I win or lose a battle, I mean, you can still see here the troop power comparison. You're just looking at the graph, you're going, why did I lose? Why did I win? In my case, I won. Why the heck is it a 4,000 to 40,000 difference? And it all comes down to stats, right? And you can also go into battle details, look at the skill details, and it'll actually give you a pretty good idea of what skills procced and what didn't, and how efficient and how well that worked out. Obviously, by having Charlie in there, it didn't really do me a whole lot of good. Obviously, there's better choices because, naturally I was sending gatherers, so I wasn't really planning on it. But like a more relevant use of this is like when we were actually holding forts. Again, somebody that's relatively comparable, if not better in some ways, more than one. I mean, looking at his, chief gear right away, you can tell, yeah, that looks pretty dang spicy, don't it? And then he's got level 4s and 5s, level 4s, and I've got level 3s and 4s, and level 2s and 3s. So by all means, statistically, it's not looking very good. He's got 10s, 11s, and 10s, and 11s, and 10s, and 11s, and you're looking at my gear, and you're going, whoa, that ain't looking good. That ain't looking good at all. And then you look at my infantry, my health, and what stands out to you probably right away just by looking at this is, oh, hey, your infantry attack is lower than his. But when you compare that infantry attack to his Lancer defense, it's still higher. If you look at my infantry defense and compare that to his Lancer attack, well, it could be better, right? He's got a 3% one-up on me. Now, if I take my infantry lethality, which is at 594, and compare that to his Lancer health, which is 602, obviously I'm running behind on Lancer health a little bit, but not by much. Now, if you look at, like, say, my infantry health, which is at 771, and you compare that, to, just looking at, like, even the lethality set that the marksmen have, it's 610. It's substantial difference, right? But when you compare these stats from, like, infantry defense being that, 646 to the marksman attack at 649, there's only a 3% difference there. I'm only comparing the counters, and that's the main thing. You don't want to get that confused. And in other words, you don't want to compare what you're, so like, for example, an infantry attack stat is really relevant when you're hitting Lancers, right? But just as much as it is also hitting, like, if you were hitting inf on inf, range on range, marksman on marksman, Lancer on Lancer, it's like, that's obviously relevant as well. And that's why when you look at it as a straight across, it gives you a very straight across comparison. But, again, it's just something that you want to have in your pocketbook. Now, why did this work? Why did this win? That's what you're ultimately wondering, right? And at a glance, you can tell that one of the things that almost everybody does is you're going to see that they've got Jesse in there for the first hero. This is very important. The first skill of Jesse is actually very, very relevant here. You'll see why I don't like you using Gina for the first hero. I can go on at length about what went right and went wrong here. Like here, you've got a Sergei. Okay, so you've got Sergei, and then you got Jesse. Yes, their skills stack, so there's not a question of whether that stacks or not. Like here we've got a Geronimo, another Sergei. Now we got a Patrick. Okay, that's, relevant because that's adding HP. Now we got a Flint. But the 3-star Flint, okay, is that good or bad? Is that adding to it or not? Now, these are questions that are, worth asking. Okay, but you notice that we've got 2 Sergeys, 2 Patricks. We have 2 Jessies. So we even have 2 Geronimos, right? So we're trying to make, basically the bonus is if you were looking at them on paper, looking at the very first skill, okay? when I was mentioning Flint, you'll notice that, yeah, you get a 40% damage up when it's obviously maxed out, which in this case was level 3, so it was more like 24%, even at best, right? But then you compare that now to, like, say, for example, a Jesse that maybe you have at 4 or 5. You get a damage dealt increase by 25% when Jesse is maxed out. So obviously there's a stupid, it's basically an efficiency whenever you're attacking. When you're defending, it's still relevant, right? You don't want to completely ignore it. Now, you were wondering, oh, what about Jesse? Well, that's 25% damage up. Conveniently pretty similar skill stat that you get with Jesse. So there's not really, you're not doing yourself any harm there. If you're wondering, well, what about Patrick? Well, yeah, there's 25% HP there, so that's relevant. And if you look at like Sergey, well, that's a 20% damage taken down, so you're reducing damage, and it's wonderful for defense. Okay, this is all very relevant, because whenever you're defending, you want to pay very close attention to this, because this is what is ultimately going to allow you to win rallies. And it is also going to be the difference between you losing rallies whenever you're defending or attacking. Because in general, if you aren't paying attention to this in your rally, you are going to find that if somebody sends somebody like Gina as their first hero, the problem is that first skill that you see here is only stamina cost down. It's not doing anything for you. This is a huge issue that a lot of people end up doing by mistake, by sending, whatever they have and blindly just throwing it at a wall and hoping something sticks, which is stupid. Don't be that person. Now, you might have heard that the recent update actually did change a couple of skills, one of them being Philly's skill, which is now an attack up and a defense up skill, which is to say that it's increasing the speed at which you attack and the defense for your troops. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is not as useful as it was. But, by all means, when you compare HP that you would get with Patrick as opposed to what you would get with Philly, it's just kind of a question of where are you in the battle? Like if you look at Molly's skill, for example, you get a 20% stun. A lot of people look at stuns and go, what does that mean? Is that good? Is that bad? Should I be using stuns? The answer is no. Okay? Defense or attack otherwise. Don't do that. It's okay in arena. You can use Molly for arena if you'd like, but do not use it in PvP because stuns are not really going to be doing you any good. This is why you don't see people using Natalia and Molly. Now, you might notice that Alonso also happens to have a stun. That's why you don't see Alonso being the first leader for a join. Now, if you're wondering, well, how do I know which hero I am getting the stat bonus to, or, basically, help me, I don't know what this flag is that you speak of. Okay, you see that little flag by Geronimo? Okay, this is the flag that I am referring to. This is what dictates which hero skills are, the very first hero skill. This is effectively what is deciding that, okay? That's the main thing that you need to know. Now, if you're wondering what my slides are, obviously I can't really show you because conveniently I have all my arches out. But that's, unfortunate, but it is what it is. But that's one example of some reports that I've actually had, and we just recently got through our what do you call it? The we got through a stronghold battle not that long ago. So there was a lot of back and forth, where okay, I lost a battle and I won a battle. I lost a battle and I won a battle. And again, it's a back and forth. Where I'm at 655, I'm 497, he's 602, and just tosses and turns. Now, one of the things that I have going for me that he doesn't have is that I have FC3. Okay, that does make a difference when you're fighting, because compared to somebody with FC3 but only a pair of FC2, and the people that are joining have FC1 and 2, okay, by all means, you would think, well, surely they're going to win. They're sending Jesse, but then there's that one guy sending that to Natalia for the stun, which isn't doing you any good. That one guy, that one guy who could have done it. That one guy who shouldn't have used Molly. That one person. And it makes or breaks a rally. I kid you not. It's the little things like that you pay very close attention to. Now, you can see here I've got some T5s and T6s and some T8s. Those are bad. Obviously, we don't want that, right? You want to avoid that. So looking at it, yeah, there were instances where somebody was sending in equalized marches. That's not good either. right? You want to avoid having that because you are effectively losing troops to tier. That's part of the reason why I would lose a battle and win a battle is, if somebody didn't fill correctly. But again, I digress. But more or less, like if we look at like this battle, okay? All right, again, much the same situation. You see, I don't really change it up. And I would love to use Alonso here if I could for my second tier, because obviously that's a 40% gain, but I don't have him maxed out, and therefore you use what is best. That's one thing a lot of people don't understand, I think, is, they typically gravitate to, well, I the good skills, blah, 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 blah. But, it's like, it also doesn't do you any good. If it's at, like, tier 1, it's not going to help. I don't need a tier 1. I just need you to be, like, somewhat capable of sending the correct stuff. And so like here, this is part of the reason why Bat was such a formidable foe is, with a couple of tweaks, it didn't take much for his marches to be pretty darn efficient. But again, it's the people that would join a rally like this, and you've got tier 9s and tier 10s, and it all comes down to a numbers game, over who has what stats and what marches are available in total rally. And again, I really strictly think that part of the reason why it even did as well as it did was because of the FC3 that I have in there and the people that are joining and defending. Yeah, and those are little things that'll actually add up. Now in this case, it was an attack, so we ended up losing this hit. Even though I had some superior stats in some places, you can see like even though my infantry attack is way up, right? That doesn't really do me any good with a Lancer health of 690. And it, even though the Lancer defense is at 564, it adds up. It's like the little things that you got to pay some attention to. It's one of those things that it'll tack onto your list of things to kind of focus in on. Let's see if we can find another report here, because again, it was a lot of fun going back and back. But again, I point this stuff out to you because this is how essential it is to battles. I mean, it's one of those things that, one of the reasons why I was having such a hard time was because, mind you, just to have like a fairly decent set, it's not like cheap. What you're saying this here is like several $100s, almost like a couple $1,000s even. And then that's being generous. Because you can see, even though I've got some T7 and T10s, I'm not a fully decked out player either. And that's what really kind of stretches any army thin. And you can see one of the reasons I'm doing so well here, stat-wise, is because my core stats are higher. I actually invested more into my research, and that's part of the reason why. But it's also just having the right gear, the right heroes, and that is ultimately what pays dividends in the end, and it could have been better by all stretch of, it could definitely have been a whole lot better, right? But, like here you got another Natalia. It's just the little things like that make a huge difference. Here you got a Gina, and it's like, well, that added nothing of value to the rally. 2 people in a rally that can literally break a rally apart. And anyway, I could digress and break them apart and maybe make someone mad doing that. But those are the things that are very valuable in both joining rallies and sending them. So hopefully that is of some value to you guys. And again, if you are interested in Whiteout Survival and you would love to learn more about the game, consider subscribing. And I'll see you guys to the next video.